Tonight, 3 weeks in the spotlight for Sinn Féin as one bad story after another dominates the airwaves on both sides of the border. We'll examine the position the party finds itself in and what it might mean for the forthcoming election in the Republic and the stability of the Stormont executive. And what to do after 30 years in the front line of Northern Ireland politics. Stephen Farry's post-Alliance career has got off to a controversial start. The former MP joins me live for his first interview since taking up that new job. Hello. The big talking point tonight, as in recent weeks, is the problems facing Sinn Féin. So, what's the impact on the party on both sides of the border? Is everything now finally out in the open? And will the situation damage the party's hopes of getting into government on both sides of the border? Just some of the questions we'd like to be asking someone from Sinn Féin tonight. But in the past 3 weeks, despite asking repeatedly for a representative to appear on The View or Sunday Politics, no one has been made available. And that's despite senior figures in the party appearing regularly on a range of programmes in the Republic. Nonetheless, there's plenty to talk about. I'm joined in the studio by the political correspondent of the Irish News, John Manley, and by the Belfast Telegraph correspondent, Alison Morris. Kevin Marr is a former NIO Special Advisor, and Gavin Riley is a political correspondent at Virgin Media News. Welcome to all of you, and thanks very much indeed for joining us on the programme tonight. John, first of all, how much worse is the situation for Sinn Féin 1 week on since you were last sitting in that seat discussing the party's woes?
Well, it's a much bigger mess than we talked about this time last week. Then we were talking about the legs of this story tiring, but over the weekend, the details or the Brian Stanley controversy emerged, and then there were big hints about what was to come in the middle of this week with Niall O'Donnell.
Yeah, it's got substantially more tricky for Sinn Féin to handle, as John's suggesting, on both sides of the border. This was a party, Alison, with a reputation for keeping a tight rein on controlling its narrative, and yet in the past 7 days, we've seen major problems for Sinn Féin, north and south. How has that happened?
Well, there's a number of things. First of all, Sean McGuire, who is obviously one of the people who lost his job because he gave a reference to Michael McMonagle, would have been the person who was responsible for a lot of that discipline, for organising the press message, and he's gone. So the person who would have been fixing this isn't there. Then you have what was described to me by a party member last week is people smell blood. So people who have a grudge, of which there are many, be they ex-members of Sinn Féin or people who have just had run-ins with Sinn Féin members, can see that it's almost like a wounded animal, and this is the time, if you've dirt, get it out, because the most damage can be done. And what we can see then with the controversy that arose around Niall O'Donnell is that this was something that had maybe been doing the rounds in political gossip for quite some time, but this seemed like the opportune time then for this to come out. I think the Brian Stanley thing is something quite different, and when we know the details of that, he should probably have just apologised and moved on with whatever he was going to do. But the other two scandals, I do think have proven quite difficult because they involved allegations, including child protection, and that's a difficult issue, whether you are a business, whether you're a newspaper, a broadcaster, or a political party. They're really sensitive subjects, and they're things that people want to know that there's openness and transparency around. And I think it's the messaging that really got them in trouble in terms of McMonagle and in terms of the Niall O'Donnell crisis. I think that is an issue in terms of how he was allowed to leave, because then he continued on, I think, in a way that made it appear he was still very much part and parcel of that party.
Yeah, and yet, of course, Sinn Féin would say that it followed the procedures correctly as far as that case is concerned. They actually did follow the procedures
correctly as far as that, and I think they did. But the problem wasn't the procedures, because the procedures were followed to the letter. He was suspended, he was reported to police, reported to social services, and the matter was dealt with. He was suspended, and then he's no longer part of the party. The problem was that Mary Lou then had given a sort of, I suppose, glowing reference as he left, and that appeared that he had left under very different terms. And it almost looked to me like he believed he had left under different terms, because while he was not seen at any Sinn Féin events, which he would have been, he wasn't at Art Ashes, he wasn't any of those things, and that in itself was an indication that he was outside of the loop. to him himself, and I suppose his social media presence, it was just business as usual, and he continued on as if he was a member of the party.
Yeah. Gavin, we'll talk about some of the details surrounding that in more depth in a moment or two, but just as an opening thought from you, not very long ago that commentators were saying the initial Michael McMonigal controversy wasn't really breaking through in the Dublin media. In the past week, we've had the Brian Stanley development and the Niall O'Donoghue development, and it's a story that has been dominating the headlines and really gaining traction north and south of the border.
That's right. I was on this programme 2 weeks ago and I was remarking to you at the time that the McMonigal situation hadn't really pierced the media bubble in the Republic. But here we are. Not alone do we have that and the Brian Stanley situation and the Niall O'Donoghue situation, but also inside the last week, almost easily overlooked at this point, the resignation from the party of Patricia Ryan, who alleges that there was some kind of central meddling in her constituency organisation and a failure by the party headquarters to try and avert that. So this is a massive issue. And I think what is particularly difficult for Sinn Féin is that although there might be the perception among Sinn Féin supporters that there is a sense of media ganging up and trying to exploit, almost alluding to what Alison said a moment ago, this moment of vulnerability, the plain truth is that the situation regarding Brian Stanley, regarding Patricia Ryan, and indeed regarding Michael McMonigal are all somewhat unforced errors, all of which have independently and simultaneously come to light inside the last couple of weeks. And the Niall O'Donoghue situation, albeit led by reporting by Fionn Sheehan in the Irish Independent and replicated in the Belfast Telegraph, ultimately preempted by Sinn Féin putting the name into the public record and all privilege on Tuesday afternoon, and thereby opening this fresh can of worms as to whether they were fully truthful about the circumstances of his departure. So these are all individually all unforced errors and all coming all so close to each other, and of course at a very delicate time when it comes to the southern electoral cycle.
Kevin, what do you make of the way Sinn Féin has handled the issues it's faced in the past week?
Well, I think Gavin probably sums it up very well there, talking about unforced errors. When you're in a crisis, as Dennis Healy once famously put it, when you're in a hole, stop digging. And I think that's certainly a lesson for them in the handling of this. But I think Alison's point a minute ago, I think was absolutely bang on, that we're dealing with obviously very difficult subject matter, and in politics, these kinds of issues are politically toxic, and they run ahead in terms of how the public perceive them, whether or not you've handled them by the letter of the law or not. They're very, very difficult. Any association with these issues around child protection are incredibly difficult. But she's right in as much as well, in as much as these kinds of issues affect all organisations, and that's not to kind of demur from the problems Sinn Féin has got. But you put any Irish political party, north or south, or any British political party in Google, you will find exactly these same cases come up time and again, as indeed they do in every university, in every police force, every part of the National Health Service, and every local authority as well. So they are very, very difficult to do because you've got lots of moving parts here. There's things that we can see and there's things that we can't see. We can't see, for example, that organisations, and that includes Sinn Féin in this instance, have got to be cognizant of employment rights as much as anything else. That's a consideration. They've got to be very careful about future-proofing their legal position as much as anything else. So it can often appear that you're slow to deal with things. But behind that is often legal advice, which tells you there's only one way that you can deal with it, which is very frustrating in politics, because politics is so much about instant perception and the emotional kick. And as I say, when you're dealing with subject matter like this, the public takes a very firm view of it very, very quickly, regardless of the facts.
Yeah, just worth clarifying for people, the Stanley and Ryan cases are not safeguarding issues, and it's worth just bearing that in mind. I wonder about the Sinn Féin decision. Let me ask you this quickly, Kevin, since you're there. Sinn Féin keen to come on air, happy to come on air in the Republic of Ireland and answer questions, and not doing that in Northern Ireland, and we've made it very clear that we have issued multiple invitations to senior figures within Sinn Féin to appear on this programme and our sister programme, Sunday Politics, and that has not happened at all over the past 3 weeks. Now, why have different approaches to actually explaining the situation? If you think, as a party, that you haven't done much or anything wrong, why take one view in Dublin and a different view in Belfast?
To point the obvious, you'd have to ask them, but perhaps they're not. They won't tell you. But look, I think
I'd
it's a
love
very.
to ask them, Kevin, but they won't appear to let
It's a
me
very,
ask
it's a
them.
very sticky wicket. Look, it's a very sticky wicket. These are very, very difficult issues to contend with and deal with. And what we've seen, in terms of the coverage of this issue for the last 3 weeks is we've seen a massive dust storm kicked up, and there's lots of. I've read lots of conjectures, lots of supposition, lots of innuendo, half facts, Sinn Féin processology, and dancing on the head of a pin. And the kind of coverage of this has almost got ahead of the issue. And I think that's very true. And Gavin made the point a minute ago that coverage in the south has cranked up an awful lot. And we've seen the debate in the door there the other day. Now, I mean, as the Romans would say, cui bono, who benefits? Who benefits from this? Well, we're going to have a general election called in the south next week, so it's not unadvantageous for certainly the Irish political parties in the south to see Sinn Féin roughed up quite a bit as well, and some of their media outriders in the south, which is obviously a very, very partisan media, very, very anti-Sinn Féin media, pile into this story and keep it running and keep having a go at them. So we've seen, we've seen an absolute score. But when you strip this back, at the moment we've got 3 issues. They're discrete issues, they are different issues, and they are a mixed bag in terms of how Sinn Féin has approached them, how they've dealt with them. In the last case, and I don't want to get into particular specifics and particular names, but in the last case that's come to light in the last few days, it's almost a textbook way of dealing with this issue. As soon as it's brought to light, they send the allegations to social services and the police. They come back 2 weeks later and say there's no case to answer. And then there's a perfunctory statement put out explaining why this gentleman has stepped down from public life, and that's pretty much it. Now that is effectively how any organisation, any other political party would deal with this particular issue.
Okay.
I mean, but we're getting lost in, as I say, the processology, the permanent sort of micro questions about how they're handling specific issues and all the rest of it.
Well, just to pick up on that, Gavin, just to pick up on Kevin's point there, I just want to ask you about this. Niall O'Donnelly was suspended from Sinn Féin last September. He announced his resignation from the Seanad on health grounds in December, which took effect in January 2024. So there was a period where he was not a member of the party, but was still, notionally anyway, the Seanad leader, the Sinn Féin Seanad leader. And you've also been looking at some issues surrounding his salary arrangement. So on the one hand, Kevin says followed due process. On another hand, critics will still say there was a lack of transparency.
Yeah, and critics will say, and notwithstanding Kevin's point about the general procedure of how this is handling, there is still an aspect that because the party sent such a laudatory statement on his departure, that there was not just merely a sin of omission, but rather some level of obfuscation within the party as to the exact circumstances under which he departed. On the financial front, you mentioned his decision to resign from the Seanad and the party, communicated to the party and agreed on October the 5th last year, but that resignation, as you say, not announced until Christmas week and not taking effect until the end of January. Now, Sinn Féin, and I put this to Padraig McLaughlin, their whip in the Republic yesterday, and he said he was at that meeting on October the 5th where Niall O'Donnell very much looked like a beaten man, and because of their concerns around his mental health, it simply wasn't tenable to be in ongoing contact with him to try and cajole him into making the necessary arrangements to end his Seanad tenure. So in one aspect, the fact that he was getting the salary for a number of months afterwards, receiving travel allowances, that is simply an unfortunate consequence of the fact that he was incapable of communicating his resignation. But there is one other parallel aspect to this. As you mentioned, the fact that he was due an allowance for being the Sinn Féin group leader in the Seanad. Now, that is not simply a matter which is paid on an ongoing basis, month by month, rolled over, copy and paste, if you like. I am given to understand that the Oireachtas gets in touch with individual political parties every month in advance of processing its payroll, effectively, and asks them to confirm the exact identities of who should be getting specific allowances for being party whips in the Dáil or being group leaders in the Seanad. So although Sinn Féin would have known at an institutional level that he was gone from the party by October 5th and that he wasn't going to be going back to the Seanad under any circumstances, they still would have communicated to the Oireachtas authorities in October and in November and in December that Niall O'Donnell was still their Seanad leader, despite knowing that he wasn't even a member of the party anymore and that he wasn't going to be capable of fulfilling that function. And the difference is, it may not seem like a grand amount, but the principle of that means that the Oireachtas was told 3 times he was still in situ, and he would have received tax-free allowances of about €1,650 as a result of Sinn Féin communicating that when they knew that he wasn't going to be in the party.
Okay, it's very interesting to hear you setting out your understanding of that situation. John, let me come back to you and just pick up on a question we were discussing a moment or two ago, and that is the difference in the way in which Sinn Féin leaders are making themselves available to answer questions in the southern media, but not doing the same thing here in Northern Ireland. And it is very marked, isn't it, that that's the case?
Yes, but I don't think it's isolated to this particular issue, though it's very marked over recent weeks. If I could I've used a couple of examples. I would get an email every week telling me where Irish ministers are going to their engagements for the following week. I'd also get a regular email from Sinn Féin in Leinster House saying that Mary Lou McDonald, Pearse Doherty or Owen O'Brien would be at the plinth to answer media questions at a certain time. Yet what happens in the north is you play a game of cat and mouse with the ministers and with Sinn Féin representatives. That's also applicable to a degree with the DUP, less so with their executive partners, Alliance and the UUP.
Yeah, so what you end up getting is, and we've had this a little bit over the last number of weeks, you get doorsteps with senior figures from the parties, Sinn Féin in particular in this case, but what you don't get is the sit-down interviews that you would maybe expect in these circumstances and that you do see happening south of the border.
Well, yeah, that's becoming the typical format is the doorstep, where you get a chance to maybe ask one question, you'll possibly shout a supplementary. Very often you don't even get your question answered.
Yeah. This is interesting. There are a lot of critics who are taking advantage of this situation as far as Sinn Féin's difficulties are concerned. But Alison, you get a sense of the scale of the challenge facing Sinn Féin when you see a letter published last week, I think it was the middle of last Wednesday in the Irish News, from Sean Seeley, the father of the Sinn Féin councillor and former MLA Catherine Nelson, in which he says Sinn Féin failed to get its leaders in front of the press quickly enough, which he refers to as a political mistake. He says Conor Murphy's sit-down interview with Enda McLafferty was a disaster, and he says action must be immediate to rectify the situation and learn lessons from the past 2 weeks. And that is a letter that was published before the Brian Stanley and Niall O'Donoghue cases came into the public domain.
Well, I actually went and hunted the letter out because, Chris Stanley mentioned it here last week.
Yeah.
And when I read it, part of that also says that the Sinn Féin leadership needs to go in front of their membership and ask questions. And I've been speaking to Sinn Féin members over the past week, and the majority of them are in agreement with the tone of that letter and the majority of the content that was in it. So right now, Sinn Féin are clearly in crisis mode, and they're keeping themselves away from the media in the north and the south. Of an election coming, so there's no other choice but to get out and engage. But I do think it's going to come to the point where not only they're going to need to engage with their membership, but explain what the strategy is to get out of this mess and to move forward. I think they're very lucky that they have breathing space here, because there's not going to be another election till 2027. In the south, they were already, I suppose, going down in the polls in relation to immigration before all this have happened. And anyone I have spoken to within Sinn Féin is basically saying, we know we're going to take a hit, we're just going to have to take it and then regroup after the election and try and see how we move on from then. There's two different types of, I suppose, people in Sinn Féin. There's those who will always be on message, will attack the media and say you shouldn't be covering that and that's a non-story, or what about this story over here? And then there's those people, I think, who are, see more of a bigger picture. What, the way they would be described it to be is, we're here for a United Ireland, we're here for Border Poll, that's what we're here for. We're not here to protect individuals or egos or, certain people just because maybe their family's well got. We're here for the bigger picture. And I think that that's probably the message that the Sinn Féin leadership are getting from their membership now.
Very interesting, John, isn't it, to see people within the broader Republican family criticising Sinn Féin's handling of this particular situation over the past number of weeks. Where the DUP is on this is also very interesting. I should say we did ask the DUP to come onto the programme tonight, but we were told, again, no one was available to take part. Now, the DUP is clearly keen to hold Sinn Féin's feet to the fire, whilst at the same time making sure not to burn down the Stormont institutions. That is a very difficult tightrope for that party to walk.
It is. You've seen the figures. Obviously, Gavin Robinson came out last night and was critical of Sinn Féin. Generally, it's a second string and the backbenchers who are doing the attacking at the moment. And I think that goes for, Alliance has been very quiet also. So there is a sense that nobody really wants to destabilise the executive at the moment. To come back to what Alison's saying about the wider Republican family, I think we need to frame this in terms of trust. And Sinn Féin is leading at the fore in terms of the Irish Unity Project. And in order to convince people that those people that are going to vote for in a border poll for United Ireland, they need to trust Sinn Féin. And this undermines any sense of trust that they are going to get from that constituency.
People are saying we shouldn't be protecting individuals or egos. You know, we know Niall O'Donnell is very well got and he comes from a very Republican family, and there's people who think, was he protected because of that? We know that there's mental health issues there as well, and I don't want to be making those worse than they are, but you'd think that, is that the reason, where somebody else, maybe if they hadn't had that stature, would have been thrown to the bus straight away? And the bigger picture is people saying, if we are the custodians of the United Ireland project, if we're going to be the people that are going to take that forward, we need to stop protecting individuals and think of the bigger picture. And that seems to me where this debate, internally at least, has moved within the last 2 weeks. Right now, I think they're just hoping that some other political party has a scandal coming down the line to take this away from them, or that something else happens, that this falls off the front pages, which is why I think when we had the debate about should the portrait come down from City Hall, there was no objections from Sinn Féin at all for that, because at this point in time, it's just, you know, let's not put up any opposition. Let's just deal with this and let it go away. OK, Kevin Marr, just to come back to you, I wonder what your slightly external perspective on this, because you're not living on the island of Ireland. What is your thinking about the potential damage there could be to people like Michelle O'Neill in terms of her leadership, and I suppose critically Mary Lou McDonald, who is, you know, notionally about to lead that party, which has been riding high in the polls and isn't anymore, and that was before these latest crises hit. She's leading that party, we know, into a general election, certainly in the next few weeks or months.
I mean, it's just interesting just to reflect on what you were talking about a moment ago, that in a sense, the political attack is not coming from parties in the north. I think anybody that's ever been involved in politics, I don't mean to admit this in a trite way, but anyone that's ever been involved in a political party always thinks there, but for the grace of God go we, because if it's those guys this week, it will be us next week. And there's a sense that actually don't try and make too much out of some of these difficulties simply because you know, it can blow back on you too. But in the south, it's a very different calculation, I think. And it also reflects, to go back to your original question, of why there's a media effort down there and perhaps not in the north. There needs to be one in the south, simply because, and I think Gavin speculated probably very adroitly a couple of days ago that the election will be called on the 24th. So we're very, very close to that Irish election. This comes at the worst possible time, I guess, for Sinn Féin in that respect. We'll see, perhaps with some early polling, how much damage this might have done. But I mean, I think there's a lot of politics now that are wrapped around this issue, and I think, you know, you've got to look to the other parties, you know, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, that have run the south of Ireland for 100 years. You know, they're thinking this is a great opportunity for us to push Sinn Féin back down in the pecking order, and that moment in February 2020, when there was that great surge where they won the popular vote in the last general election. You know, the Ancien regime wants that to be a blip, not a paradigm shift, and so they've played this as hard as they can, I think, this week. But again, what's come out of this is just conjectures and suppositions that have been you know, amplified by their media outriders.
OK, Gavin, it falls very nicely for you to give us a final answer on how big a challenge it is for Sinn Féin in the teeth of a general election in the Republic. And I wonder what your latest bet is as to when it'll be called and when it's going to happen.
Just to address the points that the other panellists have been making, I think there naturally has been an obligation on senior Sinn Féin figures, at least south of the border. Obviously, would encourage them to speak north of the border too, but to take as many media appearances as they can, because they also, to borrow Alison's sort of phrase, they kind of need to take their beating and hope that something else is going to pop up very soon. As regards when the election will be, I don't want to bore your viewers at 11:08 on a Thursday night with the nuances of the Dáil schedule. Officially speaking, it is not going to be called next week, but I think the furniture remains set for the government, if they want to get all their business done next week, to call that. So if they were to call it this day week, I suspect it would be polling around November 15th or 16th, the Friday or Saturday. If not, the Dáil rises for its recess from next Thursday, which means that there's basically almost 2 weeks of de facto campaigning anyway before the Dáil comes back the second week of November, and that might be the opportunity to get it done. One influential Fianna Fáil figure told me yesterday they believe that the election is going to be called only about midway through November, because they reckon that Simon Harris's diary is suspiciously empty for the second half of the month, that he's leaving that open for some kind of campaigning afterwards. That would mean an election in December, when the last time we had an election in December in the Republic was in 1918. Pretty revolutionary then for Sinn Féin. They might be hoping to try and hark some echoes of that again next time around.
Yeah, it's a very interesting idea that you're floating there. Anyway, it's coming, that's for sure, no doubt about that. We'll leave it there, folks. Really interesting to hear your thoughts. Thanks very much indeed for joining us tonight. In a moment, the former Deputy Leader of the Alliance Party, Stephen Farry, on his new job. But first, a quick reminder about this week's Red Lines podcast. Episode number 200 is available now on BBC Sounds. And to mark the milestone, we invited back some of our most frequent contributors to look back at a tumultuous 5 years in politics. This is a bit of a red letter edition of Red Lines because after 5 years of conversation and reflection, this is our 200th episode.
I have trouble remembering last week, never mind 5 years ago. Just want to say, Marcus, that's very nice of you to invite me to your 200th birthday, even though you haven't told me what I'm going to be asked about. So
Because you don't need to be
You just want to make a fool out of me, don't you? That's
Not at all, because I don't think there's a question I could ask that you wouldn't have an answer to. What absolutely shaped the politics of this place over the past 5 years was, of course, Brexit.
It was very clear on that day when you heard Barnier. I remember him saying there will be checks. That was a hugely destabilising moment for unionism and for the DUP.
But it certainly was a factor in weakening the DUP, the fact that they were so influential over in Westminster with the confidence and supply agreement, but then really mismanaged it.
And you have to wonder what people will make of the past 2 weeks and Sinn Féin's first significant stumble in quite some time.
I think Sinn Féin are, if not in crisis, they're close to it.
It's interesting how a scandal on one side of the border will have repercussions on the other side of the border.
And something that I think is underreported is the hit to Mary Lou McDonald's own personal rating. She's now got a leadership approval rating of just 30%.
Everybody at Stormont at the moment is on, and has been since they came back, and they're walking on eggs.
It's been too long since anybody's been actually thrown out of the Stormont estate, isn't it, Gareth?
I have my money on somebody particularly, but I better not say who I think it might be.
And you can listen to the full Red Lines conversation over on BBC Sounds now or on Radio Ulster tomorrow at 5:30. Now, it's been a big 3 months for my next guest. He lost his Westminster seat, resigned as the Alliance Party's deputy leader and was appointed as the head of a new strategic policy unit at Ulster University. Professor Stephen Farry joins me now. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you, Mark.
Congratulations on your new title, your new job. We'll come onto your relationship with the Alliance Party in just a moment, but I do want to start with that new job at Ulster University and specifically the controversy over how you got it. How did your new role come about?
Well, it may be a controversy to some, but Jodie and I have been warmly welcomed by colleagues in the university and indeed many stakeholders across Northern Ireland who are very interested in hearing about what we're planning to do and the contribution that we could make to Northern Ireland. But the context by which this came about was there was a conversation with the Vice-Chancellor over the summer, and we were invited to put forward a proposal, Jodie Carson and myself, put forward a joint proposal in terms of the strategic policy unit. We felt that would add a lot of value to what the university was doing in line with their own strategic plan, and the university were interested in that, and it was processed through then the exceptional talent pool. So that was the context by which it came about.
So just to be clear, you and Jodie Carson, who co-leads the strategic policy unit with you, approached the university first rather than the university approaching you?
Well, there was a conversation with
who started the conversation?
With the Vice-Chancellor over the summer. So we're talking over the future of the world post-election. And at that time, we talked through very loosely the potential for something along these lines. And his response was, well, put something down on paper. Let me see what you're proposing, and we'll take a look at it.
Okay.
And that's how one thing led to another.
Okay, you and your colleague Dr. Jodie Carson, who you've referred to, former Alliance Party Special Advisor, were appointed to your new roles without a public recruitment process, and that's where the controversy has crept in. So instead, the university used its exceptional talent pool process, which has been used in fewer than 10 appointments over the past decade, as I understand it. On mature reflection, should you not have foreseen the criticism that's been levelled at the process under which you were appointed?
Well, I don't think so. the context was in terms of us approaching the university with a potential proposal. This was not a situation with the university where potentially going out to recruitment for those particular roles, but they took a view this is the way forward in that particular regard. But this type of process, I mean, it is not the normal process in terms of recruitment, and the university recognise that, but it is used in exceptional circumstances. But other universities will use this in some circumstances too. It's used in other walks of life. It's used in the media, sometimes indeed with the BBC. It's used in entertainment. It's used in terms of many aspects of politics as well. So it's not entirely unusual in that respect. This is not entirely unheard of. And it makes sense for the university in the particular circumstances that they were looking at.
OK, but, and here's where it became controversial, because the University and College Unions, Ulster University branch, the union basically for university lecturers, has said it was surprised and concerned that you were given that professorship outside the normal recruitment processes. TUV leader Jim Allister has talked about you being parachuted into plum jobs in a process which defies every component of conventional recruitment. And the Equality Commission has said it recommends that as a matter of good practice, employers should advertise all their job vacancies widely. A spokesperson said failing to advertise job vacancies is not necessarily unlawful, but this approach may indicate that the selection process is not promoting equality of opportunity. Isn't that the point? And you, as a former deputy leader of the Alliance Party, should have thought about that.
Well, this is a university policy that predates the approach that we made to the university. Others use something similar to it. We were not displacing anyone in terms of what we were doing. We're bringing genuine additionality to what the offer of the university is. So we're hopefully helping the university to reach even greater heights than what they're currently doing. But obviously there is a process. The university followed that process, and ultimately this is a HR matter for them. And obviously, as employees of the university as well, we have rights now as employees in terms of exactly what is said and not said. But a process was set out in the policy, and that was followed by the university. So it wasn't a case of something was made up in mid-air. This was something that predated our approach and was deployed. OK, let's talk about the new role, if you don't mind. So you've taken up this new position as Professor of Strategic Policy and co-director of the university's Strategic Policy Unit. What kind of contribution do you expect to be making in the public conversation in the years ahead? Yeah, well, it's fundamentally about doing several things. It's about providing impartial strategic policy analysis in terms of the public square.
Right. So in layman's terms, what does that mean?
Well, in a sense, we're a think tank, but we're more than a think tank, because what we can also do is draw upon the resources that exist within the university, the wonderful academics that are there working in different programmes. So that they will help us in terms of advising and trying to assist a better understanding of public policy in Northern Ireland. And equally, we can help them in terms of impact. But I think they were saying that Ulster are already one of the most successful universities in the UK in terms of research impact, and indeed in some areas they're actually the best in the UK. So we're building on a very powerful platform that exists. OK, so it's a strategic policy unit led by a former deputy leader of the Alliance Party and a former Alliance Party special advisor. How do you assuage, and you must have thought about this, how do you assuage any fears there might be that you'll be approaching the subject from a very particular point of view, through a yellow lens, if you like? Well, I understand that, and one of the very first things that was said in terms of discussions with the university was I need to step back entirely from party politics, and that's what I've done. I'm no longer a member of the Alliance Party. I'm not involved in any structural way with the Alliance Party. Are you still a member of the Alliance Party? I'm not a member. You're not a member? I've resigned as a member of the party. Now, of course, academics can be involved in politics, but I was very mindful of the particular role that I was entering into in terms of working potentially with parties across the spectrum, but also the journey I've been on, having been in politics for 30 years. So it was important to make the very clear distinction between my past life and the current life. Yeah, but the Alliance Party, an Alliance Party worldview is in your DNA. How could it not be? Yeah, I mean the values that I have are still the same that I had 10, 20, 30 years ago. Those don't change. But the approach I will be making is about helping everyone across Northern Ireland in terms of having better policy outcomes. I think, Mark, we're at a real inflection point now. Over the past 25, 30 years, politics here has been dominated by crises and will the institutions survive or not? Hopefully now with restoration, we're now in a situation where we have the space for proper governance, and popular expectation is moving now and demanding better outcomes. At the same time, we're probably seeing a greater range of political challenges that I've seen in my political lifetime, not just for Northern Ireland, but the UK, Ireland, further afield. And so the need for good public policy is really acute. We have to focus particularly around what we're going to do about the scarce resources in Northern Ireland, how we can do better in terms of transformation, the efficiency, effectiveness. We have major challenges around climate change, for example, that facing us all. So we have to address those, and in particular move beyond what you would term maybe the 5-year electoral cycle, where people are thinking about the next election and how we can build consensus from one election to another.
OK. A couple of things very quickly, if we could just deal with these. Can you say for sure you will not re-enter elected politics?
Yes.
You're absolutely no question under any circumstances.
Yes, I've had 30 wonderful years, many opportunities in elected politics. I've done my time, and I've reflected on the fact I've had those opportunities. Many people haven't had those, but I feel I want to make a different contribution to public life through this role now.
Even if the Alliance Party surge continues and they offer you a safe seat?
I mean, I've been an MP, I've been a minister, I've been an MLA, I've been a councillor, I've been a mayor. I've had that wonderful opportunity across that whole range. I mean, I'm making a contribution to Northern Ireland in a different way, and that's really important.
Well, it is interesting. You say that you've done those things. I was looking up your political CV, if you like. Councillor for 18 years, MLA for 12 years, executive minister for 5 years, an MP for 5 years, deputy leader of the party for 8 years. That is a huge political shift by any standard. So you're not going to miss the political cut and thrust hugely.
Well, I will miss it. Obviously, I was running to win whenever I contested the North Down seat, but I was philosophical about the outcome and reflected in terms afterwards as to where my future would lie. And I mean, I have other contributions as well. I mean, I was a senior fellow at the United States Institute of Peace for a year. I was involved in the Good Friday Agreement. I've been involved in other political negotiations. So I have a broad spectrum of experiences, as well as having a PhD as well, which is the context for the academic appointment as well. And the same applies for Jodie. I mean, she has a PhD. She's worked in the Ulster Business School. She's been a senior economist in terms of the Economic Policy Centre, as well as her role as a special advisor. So she's a broad spectrum too. So as a package, we're bringing that real breadth of experience to the university.
OK, so you used the phrase think tank, and I imagine that you will want to be part of the conversation on programmes like this, sitting on panels, offering your opinion on policy decisions in the years ahead, and I'm sure we'll be very happy to have you when that's appropriate. Can you give a guarantee to people watching this programme tonight that if it's appropriate, you will have no hesitation in criticising, for example, well, ministers of any party, but in particular, people who were former colleagues, Alliance Party ministers in the future and Alliance Party policy positions in the future, if you think that's the right thing to do?
Absolutely. But I mean, this is not about us as analysts criticising political parties. We want to work with them in a constructive way.
But if you do feel criticism is appropriate, you will do that.
We will call it as we see it. I mean, we have that degree of independence as part of the university, but it's not our mission to be critical and go out of our way to make political points against people. We're there to give advice, analysis, and to be helpful to the wider public square in Northern Ireland. And I'm very conscious I'm not there to pursue an alliance agenda through the university, and I will be very mindful of that, particularly in terms of the issues that we will be touching. I'm not picking up the Alliance Party manifesto and running with those. Obviously, we have insights from our experiences in the past that we will be deploying, but we're here for the common good of Northern Ireland and further afield. OK,
so it's a big challenge, but you're ready for a fresh challenge?
Absolutely.
OK, well, I'm sure your critics will keep a very close eye and see that you live up to all of those commitments on the programme tonight. Professor Stephen Farry, thank you very much indeed for coming in to join us. That's all we've time for tonight. I'll be back at the weekend with Sunday Politics at the usual time of 10 o'clock on BBC One and, of course, on iPlayer. But for now, from all of us, thanks for watching. Have a good night. Bye-bye.